All right, everybody pause to admire the cute baby. So Matthew 9, while you're turning there, I am going to apologize right up front because some of this might step on your toes. Some of this may come across as bold, or it may come across as, I don't really even know the word, but know that as I say all of this, my toes are being crushed too. And it's taken a very long time for me to get where I'm at with this. So if it comes across as rude or unfeeling, that's not intended. But so I'm just asking you to extend that little bit of grace to me as we go through. And I think you'll understand why I said that when we get into it. So yeah, this message is a message that has been being birthed in me since before my daughter Michaela was born, and she's going to be 14 in January. So, been a little bit, but it's been being perfected in me since then. And it's still not quite there, like a lopsided cake. But anyway, here we go. Matthew 9. We're going to be reading from 9 until 13. Yes, it's Auntie. You never say it when you're supposed to. As Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's office, and he said to him, "Be my disciple, side with my party and follow me." And he rose and followed him. And as Jesus reclined at the table in the house, behold, many tax collectors, and especially wicked sinners, came and sat reclined with him and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your master eat with tax collectors and those preeminently sinful?" But when Jesus heard it, he replied, "Those who are strong and well, healthy, have no need for a physician, but those who are weak and sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, that is readiness to help those in trouble, and not sacrifice and sacrificial victims. For I came not to call and invite to repentance the righteousness, those who are upright and in right standing with God, but sinners, the erring ones, and all those not free from sin." So at some point, if they can get it working, they're going to put up some pictures, and it might scroll through for a while, and then it might go away, and then we might look back at it. If you find it distracting, don't worry about looking at it now. We can look at it. But if it's not distracting, feel free to look at it. It'll make sense in a little bit. All right. Get that out of the way. All right. So, from that scripture, I think there are a couple of important things that we see. The first is that Jesus calls broken people, but not just broken people, oftentimes kind of messed up people, or people that don't really make sense people, or what are you doing people. I remember when I first talked to Pastor Sam, I was like, no, I'm not the one. I don't have that story. Not a good, no. But nevertheless, God calls broken people. He called Matthew a tax collector, a sinner. I guess maybe today it would be the equivalent of inviting the crooked politician. As outrageous as that would feel to us today, that's probably as outrageous as it felt to those who were the religious leaders when he's inviting common tax collectors and fishermen and men that, are not really what you would qualify adequate, I guess, to be Jesus' helpers. So again, I want to stress, he didn't call the experts. And he didn't call those that had it all together. He didn't call the rulers. In fact, he really kind of had some harsh words for them. When you look at Matthew 23:27, it says, "Woe to you, self-righteous scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but inside are full of dead men's bones and everything unclean." And so that's why he chose men like Matthew. You see, he wanted to draw broken people. He was approachable. We read over and over again in the Gospels how crowds just came to him and people were just comfortable. I mean, for goodness sakes, when the paralytic's friends couldn't get him in, they tore the roof off because they needed to get to him. I don't know if I'd have the boldness and the brazenness to get to somebody to rip somebody else's roof off. I'd like to believe if Jesus was in there that I would do that, but that's pretty bold, right? Because he was that approachable, and he had that much of a drawing that people that needed him saw it, and they needed to be there. And most importantly, I believe, he recognized that their biggest issue may not be their current sin or may not be their current disqualifying factor. It was the fact that they didn't know who he was. We're going to take a look at another story, a popular one. John 8, 1 through 11. It says, "But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives, and at dawn he appeared again in the temple court, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, 'Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commands us to stone such a woman. Now what do you say?' They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, 'Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her.' Again, he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older one first, until only Jesus was left with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, 'Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?' 'No one, sir,' she said. 'Then neither do I condemn you,' Jesus declared. 'Go now and leave your life of sin.'" So, you see, Jesus didn't turn a blind eye to her sin. I mean, he clearly calls it sin. He clearly puts it out there. But that wasn't the first thing he worried about. He offered her forgiveness because he knew that her biggest need was to have a personal encounter with him, which is what she received when he didn't condemn her. We also see, as we look at Scripture, that oftentimes he'd approach the unapproachable, the outcasts, society's throwaways, the people that you just weren't supposed to talk to. John 4, 7 through 10, when a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone on into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." Jesus answered, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." And I think most of us know the rest of the story. He goes on to talk with her. He asks her to bring her husband. She says that she doesn't have a husband, and it comes out that she's had 5, and the guy that she's living with isn't her husband, and so on and so forth. But all throughout that story, we see Jesus focusing on this woman's brokenness and the bigger problem. Not the fact that she was living now in an adulterous relationship as well, not the fact that she had had 5 husbands, but the fact that she didn't have a true understanding and relationship with him. All right, but he doesn't ignore her sin either, as I said. He does point it out, but he recognizes, you know what? There's other things that are more important to focus on first. And so I want to ask you, do you see people like that? Do we as a church see people like that? Do we recognize them as people who are in need of an encounter? I believe there's a reason why Jesus chooses to use broken people. And I think that biggest thing is because he uses them to reach other broken or unqualified or discarded people. He didn't use the super spiritual folks because how would anybody broken relate to somebody? Now, I have a question, and it's more fun if you play along. That allows me to talk a few seconds less and allows you to have fun. Who here has ever had a moment where you just felt like you couldn't measure up. Maybe you just couldn't get your house as clean as your neighbor's, or your gardens just couldn't look the way hers did. Or, gosh darn it, we'll talk homeschooling. Homeschooling was just not going. Little Sally is not fluent in 3 languages at 10 years old. And gosh darn it, these other kids are. Has anybody ever had a moment like that? You go ahead, Rip, like where you just feel like, man, yep, nope. I put up both because that's an almost everyday occurrence for me sometimes. But despite that, he couldn't use these people who were stuck on their rules and stuck in their tradition because they would never be able to see these people the way that he did. Isaiah 29:13-14 says, "And the Lord said, because this nation approaches me only with their words and honors me only with their lip service, but they remove their hearts far from me, and their reverence for me is a tradition that is learned by rote, without any regard for its meaning. Therefore, listen carefully. I will again do marvelous and amazing things." You're too cute. "With this people, wonderful and astonishing things. And the wisdom of their wise men will perish, and the understanding of their discerning men will be hidden." Boy, do I feel like that's happened today. All right. So the important thing is we can't get so caught up on what doesn't matter that we miss what truly does. How do people know that we're Christian? How do they know? Somebody play with me. Love, yeah, right? So John 13:35, "Everyone will know that you are my disciples because of your love for each other." Now he's talking obviously to Christians here, but he's saying, hey, look, there ought to be something different about your love that makes others recognize who you are. The problem is we're getting too caught up on what doesn't matter. Oftentimes we see, and this isn't just our church, I'm not talking just our church, but just churches in general, we're getting caught up on colors of the rug or types of worship or how to do the sanctuary or whether or not to allow coffee in or do we do this or don't we do that and what color do we paint the wall. And in the meantime, we're missing what's going on around us. We're missing those broken and needing people because we're too worried about the things that really, honestly, in the grander scheme of things, don't matter if we can't get the people here. So what do broken people look like? Well, they can look like any variety. That if we throw that back up there, we've got all kinds. As you noticed, if you've already looked, there are quite a few of them that don't look a whole lot like you. They might look a whole lot more like me, or a whole lot more like something you haven't seen, or that you've shied away from. So it can get a little intimidating, right? These are some pretty mild ones. I saw some pretty crazy ones when I was doing this. All right, so as I said, notice how many of these folks don't look like our traditional church goer. But here's the thing. Shouldn't they? If we're looking to represent our community with this body, shouldn't we have people in it that look different? I mean, I look around my community and I see a lot of people in a given week, and there's a lot of groups I don't see represented here. There's a lot of people that I don't see represented here. The bottom line is if we're not drawing in people, then we've lost our mission. We've messed it up. We've forgotten what that purpose was. You see, Jesus had one purpose when he came, and it was to seek and to save. It wasn't to worry about the colors of the wall, and it wasn't to worry about rules and regulations. It was literally to seek and to save. And so he tells us what his expectation is of us. Anybody got Matthew 4:19 memorized? It's a pretty common one. This was one of the first ones my kids learned. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I will make you fishers of men. So where are my fishermen or women in here? If you fish at all, raise your hand. All right, perfect. Who would consider themselves a pretty good fisherman? Anybody? Anybody? Grandma? Okay. Grandma, how do we catch fish? The proper bait. I like it. See, you got that. So there's several things you got to have. Obviously, you got to be in the right place. You got to have your fishing pole. And most importantly, you got to have the right bait. Because if I throw a piece of pizza on there, I don't personally want to see what's going to come out on the other end. Fish that big, I don't want in my boat. Just saying. If I put a piece of candy on there, well, it may or may not make it into the water. But if it did, I can't imagine what I might pull out. So it's very important to have something that attracts that particular fish. If I want to catch trout, I'm going to put something on it, help me, Grandma, that a trout might, right? Okay, right. So, and here's the interesting thing. I didn't share this at first service, but I found is once if the fish are hungry and once they start seeing stuff, then they'll just start biting. And so my favorite time is when you literally, they'll bite on like a hook, or they'll bite on like just nothing but a tube jig. And you're like, but it's because they're that hungry, and you've got their attention so much for those worms now that it's like, they'll just bite if it's there. They don't care. They're like, yeah, this looks good. Well, here's the thing. We should be that attracting to people. People should look at us, and they should see us, and they should want to come after us to find out what it is that's different about us. In worship, we talked a little bit about this in a song we sung about sweet honey and a symphony to my ear. These are our experiences with God. But the question is, are our experiences with those who don't know God like that? Would they explain, if we're supposed to be Jesus with skin on, would they call our actions sweet as honey? Would they call our words a sweet symphony to their ears? You see, the church was never designed to be a place for us to come and get comfortable. It wasn't. So I want to back up and share a story for a minute because I think it bears, I was debating on whether to share it, but I think it bears importance. So how did I start my journey with this? Well, like I said, it's before I was pregnant for my daughter, Michaela, and I was working down in Ithaca, was on State Street, and then it became Green Street as we moved when I came back from maternity leave. But I found that oftentimes as I would switch from one house to the other, I'd have my reputation precede me as a Christian. And sometimes that was a really good thing, and sometimes maybe that wasn't so good, because if they didn't have a great feeling on Christians, then sometimes I was met with a little bit of hostility or closed-mindedness. But I had one particular instance that really bothered me for a long time. I had a coworker I worked with several nights a week, and particularly, there was one night a week where it was just her and I, and it was always just awkward for like the first several months because it was just so quiet, and no matter what I tried to do to make her feel comfortable or to try to start in conversation, I felt like something just wasn't right, and I couldn't really put my finger on it. But I just kept doing what I was doing and, just kept being me, and all of a sudden, one day, we're sitting in the living room on a Saturday evening after the guys had went to bed, and we're waiting for our relief to come in, and she says, you're not what I thought you'd be. Now, that can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on who's saying it and why. But anyway, when she said that, I kind of looked at her and I said, what do you mean? And she says, well, before you got here, she said, somebody told me that you were a Christian. And she said, I got worried. I'm like, okay. Now, what I didn't tell you is this young lady is openly a practicing lesbian and had very strong opinions on that. And so what she shared with me next was that the only experience she'd ever had with a Christian were the type that we see sometimes on the sidewalk, holding the signs and screaming about them going to hell. And so that's all she'd ever seen. So she couldn't imagine spending hours alone with me on a Saturday evening in a workplace. But like I said, after months, she said, I don't get it. And I said, well, I thought about it for a minute, and I thought, okay, am I going to bite? Yeah, I'm going to bite. And so I said, here's the thing. I said, if you want to ask me what my personal feeling is on your lifestyle choices, I said, I'll tell you. I said, but the reality of it is that's really not what's important here. I said, if we believe that something is sin, whether it be being homosexual or being in an affair or, any kind of thing that we believe, murder, whatever, I said, we have to view it all the same because so does God. So I said, listen, I said, I can't rank yours the chief sin because maybe that's what I see. I said, I have to see you the same way that I would see the young girl that's living with her boyfriend, having sex outside of marriage. I have to see you as the same as someone who might be stepping out of their marriage with somebody else, somebody who's stealing money from their company, whatever, doesn't matter. I said, the bottom line is, my job is not to rank your sin, and my job is not to save you from your sin. I said, my job is to live my life in such a way that you want to know the God that I serve, and I bring you to him, and I let him sort out your mess. And she appreciated that. And so interestingly enough, I didn't know what kind of impact that would have for several months. And so y'all remember when that crazy guy thought he knew when the world was going to end? He said God told him so. You remember that several years ago? Yeah. Had an exact date and everything. Yeah, so that day I had to work. And I come in to at least 4 sets of eyes like this at the window watching for me. And I thought, oh boy, what happened? What did I do? And I debated whether or not I wanted to go in or turn around and run. But I said, I'm going to go in to see what this is all about. So I walk in the front door, and my coworkers come, and they're like, boy, they're like, we're so glad to see you here. They said, we figured that if you came, we're okay. But if you didn't come, we were in big trouble. And I said, what are you guys talking about? Because, of course, to me, as many of you, it was so ludicrous, it didn't even really cross your mind because you're like, of course this guy doesn't know. So I was like, oh, that quack? I was like, no. I was like, he said, don't pay him no mind. And they said, what do you mean? He's a Christian just like you. I said, well, I'm not really sure what he thinks he is. I said, but what I know is that there's no way God would bother to tell him if he hadn't even told his own son. And then they're like, what do you mean? And so I was able to, because they asked me, I was able to go in and show them in Scripture where it talks about that not even the son knows the hour. And so I said, trust and believe. If he's not going to tell his son, he ain't telling this quack nothing. I said, so go on about your day and don't worry about it. So, of course, next thing you know, I'm in the kitchen, and I hear this coworker I had talked to talking to her girlfriend on the phone. And she's like, hon, we're going to be okay. She says, Jess is the most religious, I don't quite like that word, but that's how she interpreted it, person I know, and she said that guy don't know nothing, so we're going to be okay. And turns out, I guess, this girl's mom had really traumatized her with the whole Y2K thing, and so now she was really worked up. And so all of a sudden, there was peace that returned to the workplace again. And I thought, boy, well, aren't I glad I had that conversation several months ago so that I could bring peace? Because, ironically, in this workforce, in this particular house, I was probably the minority as the heterosexual female. And so it was very interesting to have that kind of dynamic and to be able to show them that. But so now back to where we were. One of the things I think we make a mistake of thinking, like I said, is that church is a place that we are supposed to come in and get comfortable. And nowhere in the Bible do I see it talk about that. In fact, I really believe that that's a strong reason why Jesus didn't tell his disciples to go and make churches. Because I think he realized that if we started putting up houses for people to come into, that all of a sudden they'd get comfortable there and they'd like the way things were doing, and they wouldn't want to invite in the outsider that might mess up how they're doing things. I know we all got that one relative, right? Or we all got that one person that it's like, oh, please no, right? You all have it. Don't sit there and act like you don't. You all have that person that you're like, come on now. Yeah, you wouldn't want them just showing up in your house, right? So sometimes I think we can have that kind of view of the world out there as well. It's like, no, I'm good. I like church the way it is, and I don't want things ruffled up. But the problem is, like I said, church wasn't meant to be a permanent residence. It was meant to be a hospital. It was a place that once you were brought in, you could get cleaned up. Who here has kids that actually went outside and played once upon a time, or maybe even now, but before they're all on their cell phones? Who has kids that go out and play? Anybody? Aaron, what's the first thing you got to do when your kids come in from playing? Usually. De-dirt. Thank you very much. Yes, and every now and again, something happens. Little Hannah trips and scrapes up her knee, and not so little Bailey might get popped in the nose if he's smart with his sister, right? And so sometimes you even gotta do a little tending to wounds, right? That happens, right? Well, that's kind of what we have to do here. See, church was designed to be a place to come get cleaned up, have your wounds tended to, and then to get back out there and bring others in. We wouldn't live 5 years in a hospital unless we were really, really sick, right? But yes, many of us will come and we'll get comfortable and we'll stay here. And we don't ever venture out these walls, and we don't look for those opportunities. And if we're doing that, we've missed the mission. Now, so what is church for then? If it's not a place for me to get comfortable, well, what is it? It's your doctor's office. When you're not feeling well, you go see your doctor, right? He gives you a checkup, he tells you what you need to do, and you get better. And most of us, every year, go see our doctor for a physical, or a tune-up, or whatever you want to call it. Do the same thing with cars, right? We got to maintain. That is what church is for us. It is a place to come have a checkup, but not to reside. We've received our treatment, and every now and again we might get banged up by the world and need somebody to apply a Band-Aid, but our job is to now get out there. The problem is this. Are we approachable like Jesus was? Are you? Is this church? I don't know if it's still up there or not, but no. But, if some of these folks that look a little different than you and I decided they wanted to come here, like that guy in the middle down there, would he make you feel uncomfortable? Would you go out and talk to him, or would you kind of step back and hope that Super Saint Sally's going to go get him, right? And he still kind of looks kind of normal. I've seen a lot crazier, right? Here's the thing. I got thinking about this a while back, and I thought, the lady that does my piercings, would she be comfortable here? Could I invite her to church? And the sad reality was, I didn't know that I could. I'm just going to be honest, because I've done quite a bit here, and my appearance has changed quite a little bit, and I've seen some interesting responses to that throughout the time, especially once the masks came off. That was fun, right? All of a sudden, people were like, what did you do? We'll get to that in a minute. But if you think I look crazy, you should see my piercer, man. I look like a newbie. She's got stuff everywhere. She's got gauges in her ears that are bigger around than the earrings I wear today. Other than her face and some of her neck, everywhere that I can see is covered in tattoos, and I don't want to know about the places I can't see, right? There's also some pretty obvious scars. I didn't mention that in the first service, but there's some pretty obvious scars that tell the tale of a really hard life at some point. Could I invite her here? Would you approach her? She wears a great big chain around her boot. Doesn't dress nothing like me or you. Could I invite her here? Would you approach her? Would you greet her? Would she feel comfortable here? If not, then we've lost our mission. We have no idea what we're doing. If somebody that's that broken can't come in these doors, feel welcome. Now I realize I have seen some stuff. Especially looking for this. I saw some stuff. I was like, oh Lord, wow. I'm not saying that you may not have to take a second because you'll see some crazy things. But at the end of the day, can you see a person as a person? Can you see them as God's child? Can you see him the way that he does? Our greatest work is going to be done outside these walls. I shared this story in the first service, and I think it's worth sharing again. My grandma, who's here today, used to go to a very sweet little church gathering. A bunch of wonderful black folks, and they do church black time, which means you get out somewhere between 2 and 7. But always the Spirit is moving, and it was a wonderful environment. I used to always love to go down there and hang out. And I remember when all of a sudden she told me that they weren't going to be able to rent the space they were renting for their church anymore. And I thought, man, God, what are they going to do? Like, these people are good people, and like something is happening here, and they're getting out in the community, and they're doing stuff like I ain't seen in a long time. I'm like, man, what is going to happen? And so imagine my surprise when a little while later I'm chatting with my grandmother, and she tells me exactly what they're doing. They're down on their porch. North Plain Street, is it, Grandma? North Plain Street, preaching the gospel, singing. Now, I don't know if you all know about North Plain Street, but we're not far from a bad area of town over there, and some of our messages might not be quite welcome over there. However, the response that they have is overwhelming. Cars stopping to listen, people walking by stopping. I don't see that happening here. I don't see cars backing up to see what's going on in this building. I don't see cars wrapped around waiting to get in and see what we're doing. I don't see people that are walking by that have to come in just to see what's going on. Because many of them aren't going to come to us. We have to go to them. And so, how awesome that we have a model that maybe we can look to follow. We need to be the church outside. This is just a building. This is not the church. Tomorrow it could be anything else, right? Which may sound very unheartfelt. Believe me, I love this church. I've been here since I was 8. I was here before this was built like this. But tomorrow, this could be something else. This isn't the church. We are. And it is our job to go outside of the walls and to be approachable and to be reachable. So, I know that some of you had to have come across a pretty big shock when my mask came off, if you hadn't seen me during COVID. And some of you probably thought, oh my Lord, what did she do? She is going through a midlife crisis. And that's okay, because maybe it does look like that. But let me tell you the little backstory to this. So, back when I was probably the age of, what's your name? Oh my, Autumn, it is Autumn? Yes, okay, I got it. See, I remembered. All right, perfect. When I was probably the age of Autumn or less, if you ever went up in my room, you'd find out that this is kind of what my wall looked like. I love the tattoos. I love the piercing. I don't know what it was that drew me to it. I thought it was so cool, I guess, that somebody could feel so comfortable to express themselves in a way that would not traditionally be accepted by the average person if that's what they thought and felt. And I remember wanting many of the piercings that I have now and thinking, oh my Lord, what would the church think? And what would my dad think? And what would Pastor Sam think? And, and so I just was the good, dutiful little Christian and, suppressed the fact that I wanted this and I wanted that and I wanted colored hair and whatever, and I just went on about it. But then God did something very interesting, and about a year before COVID, God started working on me and he started healing some things in me, and all of a sudden I realized then it really doesn't matter what you think. And it really doesn't matter what my parents think. And as long as I'm not violating God's word, it really doesn't matter, right? Because I don't care how you choose to trim your beard. I don't care how Pastor Sam chooses to wear a bald head. I don't care how you choose to do your makeup or not, whether you choose to wear slacks or dresses, whether you choose to have big dangly earrings or small or none, because it's all expression, right? We want to be able to express what we see and feel inside, right? Because we've all put on that outfit and been like, oh, that is not me. When we get it on, we're like, yeah, I thought maybe, no, it is not me. That one's going back to the store, right? But then you've all put on that outfit where you're like, yes, this is me. This is me. I feel like me right now. And that was what it was for me. So, but the interesting thing was, so how did I get from there to here? Well, I was driving for Uber, and as the pandemic hit, things got a little bit sparse. And so one day I ended up over in Cortland, and I'm not really sure how that even happened because it's really not a lucrative place to be for Uber. You really want to be in Ithaca. But somehow I think I gave somebody a ride over. Well, next thing you know, I'm picking up this young couple, and I says, where are y'all going? And they says, oh, we're going over to this tattoo and piercing place. I says, oh, cool. I says, what are you guys doing? Oh, we're going to get this piercing and that piercing, whatever. I says, oh, that's cool. I said, yeah. The girl was getting her nose pierced, and the guy was getting this thing called snake eyes, which is basically a piercing through the tongue. Personally, I like my tongue the way it is, so that one I don't understand. But it is what it is, to each their own, right? So I'm like, oh, that's cool. I'm like, oh, I've always wanted to have my nose pierced. And they're like, well, why not? And I think, okay, yeah, well. So we're driving along, they're talking, and they're, trying to talk me into going in with them. I says, yeah, I can see this right now, the Uber driver going in to get pierced, right? Well, anyway, because my job is supposed to be to drop them off, and I said, well, And they said, well, you think you could hang around, and we're only going to be a few minutes, and you can take us back? I says, well, might as well. I figured, hey, it's another fare, and, otherwise I'm going to get halfway back to Ithaca, and they're going to be calling me, and I'm the only one in the area, so then I'll have to just turn around anyway. So I'm getting ready to walk into the place with them, and I remember, distinctly feeling this little small voice say, why not? I thought, okay, God, if that's you, you're going to talk a little louder because I'm not so sure about this. Why not? And then I really felt like God said to me, you can have their approval or you can have mine, but you can't have both. Which really didn't necessarily speak to whether or not it was the piercing or not, but it spoke to the fact that it wasn't my job to worry anymore what people thought. And so I went in and I did get my nose pierced. It was a fun experience. Had some good laughs with these folks, and then I took them home. And I found the timing very interesting that God chose to release me to have the freedom to feel that I could do this as I was masked for two reasons. One, because if you saw me come in each and every time with a different piercing, it loses the shock factor. And two, because I needed people to be able to interact with me behind a mask and not necessarily know what was on my face, and then watch the reactions as the mask came off when COVID started calming down. Now, some of you may have saw me, so it wasn't a surprise to you, or maybe it was anyway, I don't know. I remember getting a lot of shock over there at the food pantry as some of these people had never met me before. And all of a sudden, they're like, wow, that is so cool. I can't believe you got all those piercings. I guess maybe they thought like I was too nice or something to have these. I don't know. I don't know if you're supposed to be mean. I guess I missed that prerequisite. But anyway, the point is, I found myself being approached by all these people and them feeling comfortable. And I thought, And so I remember talking to my grandma about this, and it was like, well, God knew you would. So, here's the thing, though. If people who have known me before they knew I had piercings, or people that have known me for 20 years because they've been attending church here with me, or people that met me maybe shortly before can know me and then be shocked and have trouble with this, that's really not a problem for me, that's a problem for you. That's really a problem, that's really a hard issue for you. Now, you don't have to like it. I get it. Listen, I've seen some that I don't care for and I'll never do. I don't understand them. But somebody else want to have them? You go do you. The point is, if I experience that, what is the average person that's up there that looks a little different going to feel if they walk in? Because I can tell you, when you're used to getting looked at by people, you can tell pretty darn quick what they're thinking sometimes. You try to hide it, but even with your mask on, your eyes tell all. And I've gotten some, and it's okay. I've also gotten a lot of compliments too, man. I'll tell you, I can't tell you the number of 70-year-old women who love my hair. I'm like, this is crazy. I'm like, I could never imagine that a 70-year-old would want to compliment my purple, blue, and green hair. I'm like, this is great. We need to be approachable, church. We need to recognize that these folks that are out there can't be held to the standard that we hold ourselves. Who here has ever entered into a contract? Lease, whatever. Okay, perfect. So, Linda and Mike, but could you or the other person be held accountable until it was signed? No, right? Didn't matter how many promises you made to each other, didn't matter how many meetings you had where you talked about it, right? And it's the same thing for somebody out there. Maybe they had some false starts. Maybe they went to, Bible school or Bible camp or something like that and got saved when they were 6, but now it doesn't really mean anything because they don't understand it. How can I hold them to the same set of rules, guidelines, whatever you want to call them, expectations that I'm supposed to hold my fellow brothers and sisters to who have signed the contract? Right? We need to stop worrying about what rules they're breaking, what their appearance looks like, who they're sleeping with, who their sexual preference is, because guess what? That's not our job to worry about. Now, we're to have, we need to tell the truth if they ask us, but that's not our concern. That's God's job to do. I'm a firm believer that most of us ain't got our stuff figured out yet, and that we'll go to heaven someday still not having all our stuff figured out, right? And it ain't no different for those folks out there. They may come in, and their biggest issue may not be that they're a drug addict, and their biggest issue may not be that they're a homosexual. It may be that they don't know their value or worth, and that they can't get free of those things or make the changes that God needs them to make until they do. We need to be a part of that. So this is where we get into an opportunity to respond. I ask each and every one of you to think about yourselves and think about where your heart is at. I ask you to consider if you're approachable. I ask you to consider if you're able to demonstrate the 1 Corinthians 13 love that is talked about. Because interestingly, Pastor Sam mentions in this newsletter, I thought it was so funny, I pick it up and he talks about that the way we're to love the unsaved is to love them like we love a brother and sister in Christ. It's no different. Without the expectations, of course, I might add. Are you capable of that? One of the hardest experiences I ever had was when I ended up working at a sex offender house for my employer. These guys were duly diagnosed with usually some form of mental retardation, and they had offended somebody sexually. Now, that was the one place I said I'd never work. And then it just so happened that I kind of needed money, and there was kind of an opportunity for a training, and I kind of felt God say, what are you waiting for? And I'm like, And so I went to the training and thought I'll never work there. And then ironically, that was where all the hours were, and I was relief, and so I started working there, and it was a really great staff base, and it was challenging, and for the first time in my life, I had to actually do something and use my brain in a way I had never used it, because after 12 years, it kind of gets redundant in certain houses, because you could literally close your eyes and go through the motions. But the most important lesson I learned there was how to look at somebody who had committed the most awful offenses and still see them at the end of the day as people worthy of respect, right? People worthy of being listened to, shown compassion. That was a tough pill for me to swallow. I got kids. I have feelings about that. For not today. That was my moment that I had to realize I didn't see all people as people. But can you? What needs to happen for you to be able to be the church outside? I ask you to take some time. If the worship team wants to come up and strum something quietly or whatever, that'd be great. And if there's a few leaders that want to be available in case somebody needs prayer, I'd like you to take some time and think about, am I approachable? Can I love people that way? And if not, why? I encourage you to come up and pray if you'd like with our leaders. If you have any other needs, physical, mental, emotional, come up as well. But let's take the time to think about taking the church outside today. Thank you.